All right, everyone, we'll just probably give another minute to get people to log in before we start. Okay, I think we make a start, and just in the interest of time, because we've got to finish on time for everyone. Well, welcome everyone to the Horizon 3 Biotech Investing webinar hosted by Horizon 3 Biotech Fund, sponsor and conducted by FB Rise and Monsoon Communications. My name is Tam Nguyen. I'm the investment committee member with Horizon 3 Biotech. Joining the panel today is Michelle Gallagher, founder CEO of Opal, an AI-powered software company, which we will definitely going to talk more on that. And then Dr. Stefan Harrier, who's the Chief Innovation Officer at the Digital Health CRC, Australia leading organisation for digital health innovation and commercialisation. We had on the flyer we sent out Chris Rudolph, who's from Volve Global. Unfortunately, we're not able to have him join. Just to let you know, the webinar has been recorded and you've seen all the disclaimer upon registration. There'll be opportunity for you to ask questions as well, if you can type in the Q&A box. And today we'll be talking about all things AI in healthcare and clinical trials. And so I guess let's start with Stefan, sort of brief introduction, a bit more, because I don't want to read your bio because it will take forever, and Michelle's as well. And maybe just a quick opening remark in terms of a bit on the Digital Health CRC, and then Michelle on Opal, and a bit about yourself, Stefan.
Thanks, Tam, and thanks for having me. Delighted to see the audience and this panel here. Really looking forward to that session. As you said, I'm the Chief Innovation Officer of the Digital Health CRC. We are one of the world's leading and Australia's leading national incubators and investors in the digital health space. Amongst other themes, of course, AI and health AI are a big focus area of our investments and the projects and deals that we incubate. I'm an electrical engineer, computer scientist by education, but also have a decades-long background in biomedical engineering and all things entrepreneurial. So I really have one foot deep in the research trenches and the other foot firmly grounded outside it, and in between a head that tries to connect and help others to connect the two worlds. That's my gig, and as such, I oversee the investment strategy and the due diligence process at the CRC. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. And Stefan is very humble. One of the things, if you Google him, you find that I think you're up to 70th patent granted. Yep. So ex-IBM, and I'm like, I can say that I've got one of his single digits, which is the end, which is a 0. So, but very, very, very impressive technical background, and certainly a big player in this space. Michelle, over to you. Love to hear from you, and let the audience know a bit about yourself and Opal.
Great, thanks so much, Tam. Well, it's terrific to actually be in the company of both of you. That I think the audience probably gathers that we're all quite friendly with each other sort of outside sort of these kind of forums, and it's always really welcome to have these very public discussions. Thank you very much to everyone who's joined today and to create the time and the space. And thanks to FB Rice too and Horizon 3 for hosting. I'm the Chief Executive of Opal. We're a small cap listed company and we're applying AI to improving clinical trial efficiencies. And the first cab off the rank in our business is recruitment. So one of the biggest bottlenecks in the clinical trial sector, and one that is very solvable and one that is very easy to improve. So we're applying a range of technologies, intelligence technologies to achieve that, particularly natural language processing and looking at protocols. But we also use social media as a critical tool to recruit. And this is quite a different approach to what a lot of technology companies in the recruitment space are using. Many of them are looking at hospital records. We actually look at the outside. So our view is a lot of people don't necessarily present at the hospital for that information to be captured. So we're empowering patients. So we're very much watching and scanning the horizon, not just for new technologies, but really understanding the behaviors of people, which I hope we get into in this discussion, because the behaviors of people are critical in understanding how to apply AI in the space. So we have a platform that we launched in May last year called Open, OPIN, and it's about clinical trial recruitment, leveraging social media, and it's a global platform of qualified patients that can be matched up to a clinical trial. We also have a second platform called Trial Key, and that's using predictive analytics to predict the outcomes of a clinical trial before it's run. But really the functional aspect of that is to apply this technology to design better trials. I started my career in a clinical role in allied health in orthoptics, which is vision science, but it turns out I was quite rubbish at that. So it's a good thing that I moved away from that into biotechnology and entrepreneurship. So I've spent about 20 years in the biotech sector and have been very fortunate to work with amazing companies and technologies, and really delighted to be here. Thanks for creating the opportunity, Tam.
No, thank you, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, we know each other quite well, and let me just share some secret, kind of, well, it's open anyway, but and we can maybe, Michelle can mention her experience as well as a trial participant, and how that brings into the discussion here. But Stefan, let's just start with you giving us kind of this overview of the sector of, in terms of AI in healthcare. And as we go through, we're looking at the challenges in, really implementing AI in healthcare and clinical trials as a subset. But, that global kind of market, and then what you see from the Australian market and the potential.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I don't want to bore you with numbers, but it's just very fortunate that we just very recently finished a major pulse check that we did together with the Australian Trade and Investment Commission on exactly what you just referred to. What does the global health AI market look like? How does it look in Australia? How are they related? So I'll just share, some of those outcomes. You'll see the full report released very shortly. What's really relevant here is that the global AI and healthcare market is over $6.5 billion this year, with a 40% compound annual growth rate. So that's the global market, right? Of course, the Australian market, and that's true for digital health as such, and also for health AI, is just a small fraction of this. However, the value proposition of developing and bringing technology into the world of health AI in Australia is extremely strong, because the Australian market resembles very much what you find in the global markets, be it North America, be it Europe, be it the Southeast Asia. There is, of course, intricate changes when it comes to regulatory environments, but generally speaking, what you have in Australia is a perfect sandbox, early stage deployment ecosystem in which you can do early stage trials, validation studies, rollouts, without having the risk of doing this in like billions and billions of dollar large markets where failure is fatal quickly, right? So Australia really is a wonderful landing pad to get advanced technology in the market, study, test it, and then scale it up to global markets, right? That's true for health AI. That's true for digital health in general. And that's the way to position your startup, your scale up, or whatever business it is or technology it is that you're trying to get out of the gate. Now, when it comes to health AI, right, or artificial intelligence in healthcare, and we'll of course talk about this for the rest of this webinar. I wanted to start off with very few generally true statements, borderline bumper sticker statements, but they are so important, right? So the first thing is that, if any technology that you deploy into the world of, clinical, into the clinical world, into the world of healthcare and medicine, can't follow a classical Silicon Valley scheme of move fast and break things. It's not what works in that field. You need to build, reliable, trusted technology. AI is a special case in this because it has a notorious, a risk of being built as a black box, and there is many uncertainties potentially around it. So that needs to be addressed very carefully, and everything which we'll be going through in the seminar is, of course, true for any technology in the life sciences and healthcare, but for AI. And bringing that technology into the healthcare space, absolute diligence in all of these design features that we'll go through is paramount to get even out of the gate. Because if you don't do this, you're pretty much dead in the water out of the beginning. And not only you, but there is hurting of the field itself, right? Because of course, that will set precedences that are either seen favorably or not. So that's one thing. The other thing is that AI is being hyped a lot, and probably rightly so, but there is a lot that you need to be very careful in understanding, really looking closely into where is AI as a technology when it comes to having real world impact. What can it do? What can it not do? And distill out these leads of how we can actually use it and how we can actually integrate and implement this without giving in to the temptation of declaring AI the solution for everything. It's a groundbreaking, revolutionary technology. It is not the panacea to solving everything, every problem on Earth, right? So we need to think very carefully about what do we apply to, how do we apply it there, and then, of course, how do we do all this, integrating it with processes in real life? How do we position AI as an assistive technology, not a replacing technology for the human decision maker? I'll stop at that point and hand it over to you.
No, thank you. And the numbers are so important because you got to put in context and a couple of key points that we're going to pick up as well in terms of the challenges in the implementations, in the healthcare setting, the buy-in from the patients, the consumer as well. We run my other role at the hospital. We run public engagement and we talk about AI robotic surgery. And I kid you not that people think robotic surgery is someone, surgeons punching the code, press enter, and the robot does the surgery. It's not. It's actually a bit more involved. Michelle, I'll come to you here from your perspective in terms of a bit more about how AI is used in clinical trials specifically. But to Stefan's point, it's that traction, it's that implementation, and often that you want to make sure that it's actually delivering as opposed to creating further hype and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's so true. I want to echo what Stefan said too. It's not the panacea. It's not always the right technology to apply to every challenge that involves data. It's interesting. I just want to sort of highlight too for our audience, there's a couple of really good things to go and look at. Deloitte published a really good paper a few years ago looking at intelligent clinical trials. And it was a bit of a futurist paper. You can find it really easily. It's one of their white papers. It's not much to read, but it was actually a really clever paper because it really spelt out this point that it is not a panacea for all things related to the challenge around health data. And it needed to be applied thoughtfully, but also realistically in the space. And AI is not that new. We've been talking about AI for actually sort of 20 years. And I remember going to JP Morgan a couple of years ago and listening to an incredible speaker, and she was talking about the AI winter. It was a bit of a history lesson, but it left me feeling really quite cold, no pun intended, because I thought, yeah, we do have to be really careful, because people in our position that's applying the technology, particularly within small companies and scaling companies, we've got to be realistic about getting people to understand what the actual technology can do, what we wish it could do. But it all, I want to draw it down, it all actually comes down to the quality of data systems. And it's a critical thing to understand when you think about the application of AI in health, that from the outside, it looks deceptively easy. And I can tell you, it's not. It's really, really not. The challenges that my tech team have with our tech stack, and thinking about the way our data scientists are struggling to make sense and apply things like natural language processing to protocols. And, you know, simple things like NLP doesn't work really well with numbers, but numbers are really important in inclusion exclusion criteria. It's like the old question about biotechnology. There's still a need to do basic research. So I really want to make it ultra clear here that, yes, there is AI being applied, and we're applying it very specifically to solving a problem. And that problem is generating revenue right now. That solution's generating revenue. But there's actually still a lot of really basic research that needs to be done, and highlighting the importance of ensuring that that is well funded within our research ecosystem, so as startups like ours can pick that up and apply it at a stage where we can see a real commercial opportunity and a real point of traction.
Yeah, and again, we'll go deeper, and there's questions in the chat box for Myra, so thank you for that. Part of this section we'll be covering the ethical aspects and the legal side of things as well, because it's certainly, the whole digital divide. Do we create solutions that are actually going to improve, assist clinicians, surgeons, and then, making creating that further inequity that, you pay a premium to see a person, and then, if you don't have a sort of private insurance cover or not paying a premium, then you sort of seen by a robot, for example. Stefan, from that, can you maybe perhaps touch on a little bit about in where things are at, from that global, but also the Australian perspective?
Yeah, I'll start with, and you mentioned it, right? The ethical design features of these AI technologies, because it links into equity just as much. The purpose of what your AI engine room is supposed to do as part of the solution that you're building is absolutely imperative. It needs to be spelled out clearly and defined up front, because it's not just there as a nice banner that stands over your marketing team's activities. It actually goes into the implementation, into the design of the entire system. So defining that purpose, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to enable a human decision maker, a clinician, to make a better decision? And how do we integrate this in this workflow? Are we trying to enable the patient to make a better choice when it comes to managing their wellness or disease? Both of them. Spelling this out, like what is it for, dictates to a large extent how you will integrate it into your solution, and how you will actually then present it to your users, which leads to the second feature that needs to be taken care of right out of the gate. It's the consumer-centric design of your solution. Just throwing something over the fence and see who catches it and how they might be using it and finding it useful, that doesn't work. You need to actually have your user community in mind as you set out to design your AI technology around that system that you're building. So that's going to be there from the beginning onwards, for two reasons. Firstly, because that is one checkbox that ensures that you're really delivering value to those who you want to deliver value to based on your purpose statement. But on the other hand, it creates trust. If you as a user are integrated into the design and the integration of a system, you understand, you learn how to impact that design, that deployment, and that taking the consumer along on that journey is absolutely important, right? It will tell them why the system is used, how it is being used, and how they relate to all of this. These are two important aspects, I think, that that are often overseen, especially when I see, admittedly ambitious and enthusiastic researchers building AI systems. And sometimes this ends up in a cool science paper, in a really good publication. But more often than not, is that also the endpoint of this technology, right? And why is that? Because these deployment design features have not been taken into account as the system was built. We can talk about how this plays out when you choose data, how you manage the data around it. There's many dimensions of this, right? When you look into automation, monitoring how your system works, your clinical front end, your back end, and the data collection. There's a lot of aspects here which we can go through on a layer deeper. But I want to really point out how important it is, again, summarizing in two statements, to take the consumer along the journey of designing your system right from the beginning, and to define a purpose of what your system, your AI technology is doing, and why that is important, the values around it, the accountability, the transparency. These are all important aspects of this.
So I think the user aspects, if I can, sort of bring it back, make it a bit broader as well. In the healthcare setting, the user is actually both the physicians or doctors and the patient as well, because I think that's where you get challenges in the implementations or adopting if you don't get the clinicians involved. And we know that a lot of there's some resistance, but it's making sure that bring the people on the journey, basically. Michelle, I want to touch on the ethical and legal aspects here, which I asked the questions here. Legal situation, recruiting patient via social media, and in terms of how that is actually relating to kind of the ethical aspects as well. And love to hear a bit more about, I guess, your experience. Last time we spoke about, what Facebook and so on and so forth. It's quite interesting. So maybe you could tell the audience on that experience as well. But Ira, thank you for the questions, and please feel free to drop the questions in so I can integrate to our discussion here. Michelle.
No, that's great. This is a really fundamental question. So in my introduction, I made the comment about ensuring that we're looking at the behaviours of people and designing solutions if they're genuinely, in this case, patient-centric or person-centric is what I'd prefer to say. If they're really person-centric, it means that the first rule that we have in our business is let's create value for the person. So we're not solving clinical trial recruitment for the clinicians or the researchers. We're first of all solving the problem of individuals, people want to know what's happening in the research world. So if you come back to the person-centric approach, our thinking is people, when they get a diagnosis or they're dealing with a significant chronic condition, they often turn to what's happening in research. They're looking for hope, and they're looking to try and understand, is there an opportunity? Is there new diagnostics? Is there new therapeutics coming down the pipe that are going to affect me? And this is the importance of understanding human behaviour in the design of a technology and the addressing of a problem. We're also seeing, and particularly throughout COVID and post-COVID, the role of social media plays a very important role. And I want you just to park a negativity bias to one side. I hate Facebook too, don't worry, but just park that to one side. Social media, and we're seeing this in Ukraine right now, social media is a critical tool in which individuals can share their experience, and they do it publicly. And it's the thing of when people are using social media to connect more and more to their patient support groups or their community around them, we have an obligation to listen to that. We have an obligation to understand that this is the way people are consuming healthcare information. My experience, and Tam sort of alluded to this. I had a very important experience with a close friend and colleague who died probably about 4 or 5 years ago now with stage 4 melanoma. So it was diagnosed at stage 4. And luckily, she and I both came from the biotech industry. So the first thing we knew we had to do was to get her into a clinical trial. And we could see Keytruda coming down the path. So the difficulty of finding a clinical trial when you're a person who doesn't have medical knowledge and doesn't really understand the drug development system, it's really impossible to navigate, which is why we have such a significant bottleneck in failure to recruit to clinical trials or failure to recruit on time and on budget, and such a big dropout rate. So the literacy in our population around clinical trials has changed dramatically because of COVID. So now clinical trials is in the top 15 Google searches, because people aren't just searching clinical trials COVID vaccines, they're searching clinical trials multiple sclerosis or clinical trials for myasthenia gravis or whatever it is. People are now far more literate about clinical trials. So our system creates careful content, and I mean careful in that all of my team are medically qualified, and on top of that, they've got digital marketing and data science qualifications. We create the content with ethics committees. We put it out onto social media for it to be discovered by people who are actively looking for those opportunities. So yes, I do battle with Facebook on a regular basis, as well as all of the other social media platforms. But these are critical communication tools, and it creates better access and better equity and better equality, particularly in economies, not just Australia, where people don't have the same access to healthcare. So our special secret sauce is we use social media very effectively. We listen to social media, and we use AI to listen intently. And this is only public social media. So the ethics around this is, in my view, we have an obligation to listen to people who are publicly looking for clinical trials, asking questions, or sharing their experience in living or managing their condition with their community in a public space. We've got a lot to learn from patients. And again, sort of reiterating that point, if we don't bring consumers, whether it's customers as in healthcare providers or customers as in people that are looking for research opportunities to participate in, if we don't design solutions, understanding their behaviour, and also bringing them along on the solution design, we're going to fail. That's guaranteed.
Mm. And it's on that point about the importance of recruitment as well, because we know well, Stefan, I'll go to you in your recent paper talking about the actual costs of a clinical trial program and how much it is. It can be a lot of saving in terms of the resource, finance, but time as well. Because if you set it up properly, you can actually, you've got a nice diagram from that paper saying how much is spent into actually going from identify, this is like trials in silico and, so on and so forth, right down to the trial part, in terms of recruitment and so on and so forth. How do you actually identify your patient, population in a manner that's actually going to reduce time? Because, and I'll go to, talking about more on the investment side, because that's important. If AI is in one way, it's all about hype, then where can we look at for actually, gems that can actually get a return on investment? So Stefan, just maybe, sort of visualize that paper that you wrote recently.
Yeah, and just point you to the paper for anyone who wants to have a closer look. It's one of the Cell papers, Trends in Pharmacological Sciences, very easy to remember title, Artificial Intelligence for Clinical Trial Design. That's what Tam refers to, and I'll invite you to have a look at that one, and just to say, what we're referencing here. So first thing I would say is, to your point, the margins in clinical trial costs, the investments are astronomical. So it takes about $1.9 billion to get one single new drug from the initial screening stages to an approved product on the market. And what happens is that you don't spend all this upfront. You spend this as you go. And especially then during the clinical trial design phase, you spend the lion's share of the overall investment. So if you find a way to just slow down, to just speed up, for example, a stage 2 clinical trial by a couple months, you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in savings. If you find a way to recruit quicker, if you find a way to recruit more reliably into clinical trials, and you just manage to do this, just in quotation marks, for a single one, you're looking at $100 millions of dollars to actually to save in the process. And here's where AI, these gems, can actually come in. You've heard from Michelle just now about its potential in the recruitment processes. Now there's other steps in the clinical trial design pipeline as well that are just as relevant to AI. And the one I wanted to point out here is when the trial actually runs, you do, and of course, many of you will know this, I'm preaching to the choir, but just allow me to point it out. You do a thing called endpoint detection, which essentially you're monitoring your patients and the effect of the drug on them, and you're trying to determine a point in time at which you can make a statistically meaningful statement on whether the drug has the desired effect or it doesn't. Now, the sooner you get to that point, the more reliably you can determine that point. The faster you will be, and the more you will save on your investment. AI is a pristine technology to combine with monitoring technology that allows you to in a more efficient, in a more personalized way, do endpoint detection on those patient cohorts. And by the way, also retention monitoring and dropout prevention and risk assessment. These are things that you can determine alongside of doing endpoint detection. AI is especially powerful there when it comes to neurological diseases, trial for, in the psychological space. That is because these diseases are extremely individualized, meaning they don't look the same in each patient, and they even change in patients over time. So this is where AI can automatically learn how these disease expressions and these interesting or relevant disease episodes look like for each patient, and help to dramatically decrease the time that it takes to determine a certain endpoint. It can help to prevent patients from dropping out and having to go through recruiting again. And it can help providing patients with retention assistance that keeps them in the trial before they develop habits and behaviors that would make them drop out of these trials. So monitoring technology powered by AI for highly individualized diseases is, I would urge anyone interested in that space, finding sort of a stick in the ground. Is a very hot topic, and we see a lot of activity in that space. Also because the ROI margins are potentially as high as they can possibly get, because neurological trials and trials in the psychopharmaca space are amongst the worst performing trials. They're also amongst the worst performing trials in later stages, which is where you will have sunk enough money before to really run the risk of not getting through to the full approval stage. So these are points where AI technology and just small applications in quotation marks, where you develop a monitoring algorithm that detects a certain disease expression, where you develop an AI algorithm that uses video monitoring data to monitor if a patient adheres to trial protocols and alerts of deviations from that. These small applications which tap into advanced AI technology in the imaging space, in the NLP space, in the time series analysis development space, can be utilized very efficiently to contribute a small part to the clinical trial design and execution process that returns massive savings and returns on investments. So that's what I wanted to point to at this point, besides the recruiting. And before this, of course, that everything Michelle said is just as true as well. But I wanted to give that complementary view that AI is also helpful further down the road as the clinical trial pipeline proceeds.
I mean, absolutely. And thanks, Michelle, for answering some of the questions in the chat as well. And, you know, I'll come back on the diagnosis side as well, because there seems to be a fair bit of activities in, you know, AIs in diagnosis. But Michelle, in trials, and just this one pop up quite interesting. How does OPAL reach potential trial participant who don't or cannot use any social media? That's a pretty interesting one.
I answer that question really quickly.
Sure.
We talk to the people in their family who do have social media. So one of the big projects we recruited very, very successfully was a group of men over the age of 75, which we assumed probably none of them were on social media. And we blew the recruitment out of the water because we spoke to their daughters.
Yeah.
There you go. Answer. Next.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good one, because
good question.
Yeah, both daughters and daughters-in-law apparently too. Because
daughters-in-law and grandchildren. Grandchildren are very, very good at this. Did you see this, Grandma?
Yeah. And so on the clinical trial side, I guess we touched on a little bit about the legal, and on the ethical side, and this is where, you know, our work in looking at. In my mind, technology needs to be, it's a bit like Horizon 3 tagline, you're investing in improved life globally. So that's like for everyone. Let's say if someone who doesn't speak English, or, you know, English is their second language, what's open and what's technology out there actually in trying to open that, you know, doors, opportunity, as you mentioned with the colleague who, you know, even though we're in the space, you got to look for trials, let alone it's that navigating the healthcare system, looking for trials.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a really important point, and this is about understanding. There was a really good comment in the chat. Did I have psychologists on my team? This is actually a really important comment. That we use consultants that have skills in that space, but here's the important part is, a lot of these social media platforms create better access and equity because they're in every language. So things like faith, and just again, park your negative bias to the side. But the good thing about Facebook is it's a technology that enables people that are vision impaired, which is my background, to be able to read. So this is all the metadata that is around images and context. So the great thing is you can switch a lot of these social media platforms into the language of your choice. So there is a native translation that happens. But we've got to remember too that really the people that contribute and participate in clinical trials are typically white, privileged, educated people in economies like Australia. So it's not at all equitable. Clinical trials are not equitable. And generally, when you think about healthy volunteers, they're normally young men. And so that's also not equitable. So this is that, you know, fundamental issue about the bias that we have in data, existing data anywhere in any industry right now, and the sort of people that are building the models and the algorithms, the bias that comes into the data set is very, very significant. So in thinking about cultural sensitivity, this is where, you know, this is probably driving real change in the clinical trial market. Because we could use social media platforms, we need to be really thoughtful and very invested in ensuring the content that is created is culturally appropriate and that it can be shared in a language that is not just their language, but it's a language that makes sense. Because I think you would agree with me, Tam, that it's hard enough for healthcare providers to, even if they speak that language, to express all of the information that needs to be expressed in a consultation to a patient to get them to understand, if that's not their first language of choice. So it's no different here. But this is where there's inherent value in some of the social media platforms, because they do have technology in the platforms that create a more level playing field, a more equitable space for people to get in on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the user experience, as I said, it's critical, and because you introduce that, that's part of the implementation, and going back to the investment, as Stefan pointed out, you got to get that traction in the market. Your solution might be fantastic, and again, love to hear your thoughts on this one, Stefan, in terms of there are diagnosis tools out there, ranging from very early startup right through to some very established, some recently raised quite significant fund. But it comes back to the utility. How much is that? Because you can really inflate the values of the company if you, and in terms of a startup or an early stage company, you want to make sure that it's actually the evidence is there, but also
absolutely, you said the magic word, the evidence.
Right? The evidence is there, but also the financial evidence that someone is actually willing to pay for your solution.
So you almost answered the whole thing. So some of the more mundane but early stage questions that we ask as part of our due diligence process is so who would be paying for this, and where is the evidence of the impact of this solution, right? So of course you can, and everyone will, right? The famous hockey stick diagram that you see all the time, where our eyes will skyrocket after an arbitrary point in time, right? So of course you look through all of this, and you do it by gathering evidence, right? So that is the most simple but often overlooked part of doing due diligence. Look at the freaking real data that's there, right? Look through Theranos, look at this, right? For years, no real evidence of that, that actually really worked. It is, of course, sort of a common scheme that, if you pitch, you certainly don't underestimate the impact that you will have, and you do all this. But at the end of the day, the evidence of your impact, as produced through tangible, quantifiable studies and proof of concepts and tests, combined with feedback from your prospective user group. That's another very important element that we would look at. Not just what the provider says, not just what those folks who build it say, but voices from those who are the intended consumer groups. And this loops back to what I said right before. If you as a startup will have worked with your consumers in mind as you develop that solution, you will have that evidence. You will have very clear points that you can point to and say, we designed this because this cohort that we did this study with said that would be important. Or we found out this user group didn't use or didn't value that part of our solution, so we did. Another question is that we ask is, what did you stop during the design process, right? What did you get rid of? If there's nothing they got rid of, big warning sign. That means they either had hit the jackpot miraculously right out of the gate, or more likely, consumers weren't really involved in the design process. So that voice, that feedback of those who will pay for it, of those who will use it, of those who will leverage it, is as important as the input from those who pitch the solution and say it's the smartest thing since sliced bread. So two sides of the journey here that we would look at.
Can I jump in there and just add to that?
Yeah.
So I think this is an important point about what you stopped doing and going through, because getting that evidence, that feedback. One of the bits of evidence that we're really interested in at the moment is listening to particularly global pharma companies talking about the need to capture patient-reported experience measures in clinical trials and patient-reported outcome measures as well after and throughout the clinical. So the clinical trial experience is not great, really. I think we have to stop believing our bullshit that sometimes, really going through a clinical trial process, the individual, the person doesn't necessarily have a great experience going through the clinical trial. And often we don't even tell them what happened at the end, so they can't often see their investment being returned for their emotional investment as well as their, physical investment. So I think creating platforms that can address these future needs and listening really carefully to what the customer wants. So for us, we're building into our platform an opportunity to capture patient experience measures throughout the clinical trial, because that's what makes patients stay. and that prevents the dropout. But that's the evidence that's required for the next learning. The other part too is thinking about co-design. So this is something that patients want. It's something that carers want. And we spend a lot of time talking to, patient support groups and patient advocacy groups. We've got some great friends in this market in Australia and New Zealand. This is a really burning issue, that they are sick to death of being part of clinical trials that are so poorly designed from a participant perspective. And this is one of the reasons why it's so challenging to recruit, because the inclusion exclusion criteria, I think they're on drugs when they create these, those things. So one of the things we're looking at trying to create is, how do we build an opportunity into our platform? Because patients are volunteering to come in and share with us their health data, and then we use AI to match them to eligibility criteria. But if we can capture more and more information, not just about patients looking for research opportunities, but patients that are in research opportunities, we can actually build an evidence base to help design better trials. And ultimately, that's what everybody wants.
Exactly, and take that sort of control and being involved as well. We've got about a minute left, so I'm going to start with Stefan. In 30 seconds, where do you see AI as a bit of a challenge here? Where do you see AI in 5-10 years?
The classic question. I think I'll refer to Gartner's hype cycle here. And for those who aren't familiar with that, you have that curve that predicts how much a certain piece of technology advances from its initial hype to what's called trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then you have the plateau of productivity. And AI in health has several aspects. Some of the technologies are very early in the hype stage. Others are marching slowly but steadily into production already. So the first answer here is, there's no such thing as AI in health and the one thing that fits it all. We got to be a little diversified. So I'll give you three examples of AI technology in different stages of this hype cycle, from initial idea to we're going to see it or we already seeing it. Digital twin technology, where you use AI technology to describe through data a certain patient population, and then use predictive modeling or even just detection of algorithms. That's a technology that I would say sits right in the middle, has some merit. We see that entering slowly but steadily the slope of enlightenment with applications, and over the next 5 years we'll surely see some applications, such as, for example, running virtual clinical trials. When it comes to AI for human decision making, we are probably we're definitely not in the full hype stage, but that's something where we need to do a lot more work to work with clinicians to have, for example, systems that are assistively used to diagnose certain diseases through medical imaging analysis that assists the human analyzer. And then something that's really early stages is where you see augmented reality together with AI technology, for example, in pain management or in other fields. So it's a broad spectrum. I talked more than 30 seconds, but if there is more interest in that, I have a lot more of that up my sleeve.
Maybe we'll come back another time to dig deeper on that. Michelle, what's your view?
Yeah, I'm going to be really quick here. So I think predictive analytics is going to have a moment in the sun, and I'm really excited about that. And I think the other thing is, to enable AI, we need to focus more on data, structured and unstructured data, and the skills and tools around unlocking value in data and learning how to capture it and use it properly. And then my third comment is, I think here's a message for anyone that's working in the clinical trial sector right now. If you're not in front of the technology that's coming down the tube around clinical trial efficiencies, you better start looking for another job, I think.
Yeah, and just to summarize, it's really, for me, it's very, in my other talk, talking about AI and value-based healthcare, it's the patient, it's the payer, it's the physician. We're talking about predictive, and so that's really sum it up in terms of AI in healthcare and clinical trials. Michelle, Stefan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the audience for joining and for posting your questions, FB Rise for hosting, and stay tuned for details of our next webinar. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay, bye for now. I'm going to log out.